Okay, well, we kind of wanted to call this the Power Hour, like on marketplaces, and we didn't plan it, where we were talking so much on the wellness category, but very very appropriate, given how hot the wellness category has been. Garrett Sachs, with GNC, I'll get you to do a quick intro in a second here. Brian Beck, who again, we've known in the industry for a long time, but Brian has really kind of pivoted to become one of the most known B2B e-commerce, specialists as well. So we thought that would kind of provide a really good perspective, as well as he's got extensive experience of working with people on Amazon. So Garrett, why don't you start just to give a little bit of your history. How did you end up, being at GNC as the international e-com director?
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I guess I jumped into international feet first. I graduated from UC Santa Barbara, go Gauchos, and moved directly to Shanghai. I spoke a little bit of Mandarin, and so I set up a business over there that turned into something that actually was profitable. So I ended up staying for about 4 years, to the surprise of my family. And from there, I spent some time in Southeast Asia, started a website that failed in Bangkok, and then lived on and off in Peru for a couple years. So now I'm back in the US and have some experience with different vitamin brands, but found a great position with GNC, leading pretty much their rest of world e-commerce, both in terms of cross-border as well as kind of an internal consultant for some of our international partners and their web operations. So
we'll talk more on some of the marketplaces that you know very well. But Brian, please give a little bit of a self-intro here.
Sure, thanks, Jim, and hello, everyone. Brian Beck's my name. I spent, Jim, as you know, 17 years in the B2C side of e-commerce. I was the e-commerce VP at PacSun. I think PacSun is here somewhere.
Yeah.
Can I see them here? Yeah.
They talked earlier.
And Harbor Freight Tools, if there's any tool people in the room, I was their VP of e-com. Anyway, many years in the consumer side of e-com and retail, and pivoted about 6 years ago to B2B e-commerce. So today I work with a lot of brands, manufacturers and distributors, big companies, Schneider Electric, and companies that a lot of you folks may not even have heard of, but are multi-billion-dollar brands. And so that's a lot of what I do these days, Jim. I published a book called $1 Billion B2B E-commerce, and what's really cool about B2B is it's a hidden secret, right? For a lot of consumer, having come from the consumer side, a lot of folks don't know how much opportunity there actually is on the B2B side of e-commerce. And I'm curious if there's folks out here that are doing e-commerce in the B2B side today. But excited to be talking about marketplaces and the role they're playing in all of this, in e-commerce globally.
Yeah, talk a little bit about how you do work with brands selling on Amazon, for example.
Yeah, so my company, I'm a founding partner in a company called Enceiba. We started about 5 years ago. We actually take differentiated brands and we help them to sell their products on Amazon, like GNC private label companies that have the opportunity to sell there. A lot of our business is with B2B companies, but also crossover B2B to B2C. And we use Amazon to both take companies in the US, build their US presence on Amazon, and then take them overseas in some cases to other divisions of Amazon. And what a lot of folks don't know is the B2B side of Amazon has gotten enormous. Amazon Business is now a $30 billion business within Amazon. It's become the fastest growing part of Amazon. And it's not only domestically, they're in a dozen markets internationally as well. And it's really an incredible opportunity, and most people don't know it. Most companies I talk to and brands don't know that it's an opportunity there. So that's what we do. We help them grow their presence there as an outsourced Amazon department.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Sorry, go ahead, Garrett.
You were looking at me so intently, suggesting maybe GNC should be using
Absolutely
e-commerce. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And GNC has a franchise model. So most of our international partners are purchasing from us wholesale. I don't know if they're writing on a piece of paper to place those orders, but yeah, more opportunity to digitize that order flow.
And so, like, we've had the pleasure of working with the GNC Mexico, team, and again, very impressive from the growth of the market from a digital, perspective. But you were kind of saying that's one of the strong franchise, partners there. So yeah, explain a little bit of rest of world. What's rest of world for you, and then talk a little bit about some of your go-to-market, like marketplace channels. Where have you been? Where have you been working?
Sure. Yeah, Mexico's a good example for us because they've been a long partner, but in the vitamin and supplement space, cross-border is not an opportunity to go into Mexico. So fortunately, we've had a very strong partner there for, I think, over 30 years, and with like 600 stores. But they operate on all the marketplaces domestically, which include Amazon and Mercado Libre, as well as their .com.mx site, which sometimes we spar on search engine results with them, but for the most part, we get along nicely in the sandbox. Apart from the franchise business, I think that it was a new concept to GNC when I joined the team to consider launching cross-border into international markets where we don't have a franchise partner. And some of those, we had partners previously, so there was a degree of brand awareness, like Brazil and Japan specifically. Those were the two kind of large launches that I led when I came upon the team, primarily on marketplaces. So Mercado Libre for Latin America, Rakuten and Amazon in Japan. And I also led the efforts with Southeast Asia on Lazada and Shopee. So in most markets, we'll let the franchise partner enjoy their borders without having competition from corporate. But there are some markets where we can complement the assortment that they have domestically. There's difference in regulatory requirements in each market. But yeah, it's allowed us to
Does the regulatory environment, often affect, again, both your priorities and your investment, profile? I know, again, from what you were kind of, alluding to with the Mexican market, we know that cross-border into Mexico, with, like wellness products can be very challenging. We found it very interesting what they couldn't do, in a sense.
Yeah, I gotta sigh after that one because I've learned that not only does each country have different requirements based on like FTC claims, like what your structure function claim is. What does your product do? Does it make your skin glow? Well, you can't say that. Or on the other side, which is the composition, which ingredients are involved in your multivitamin, for example. And not only does each country have different requirements, but in the case of Japan, we sent ashwagandha was the good example because it's legal in Japan, but Rakuten does not allow ashwagandha, and so they threatened us with a fine for making that for sale for a brief period of time. But yeah, it is a moving target, and each market is very nuanced.
What about Amazon Japan? Do they sell ashwagandha?
I have not launched ashwagandha on
There you go.
Amazon.
Brian, we didn't talk about the regulatory side from your perspective, with some of the more industrial brands and clients. I mean, is that something that often becomes like a huge issue?
For certain. I mean, when we deal with more B2B traditional products, whether that's tools, there's variants that are specific for each country. So it's power ratings, or if we're dealing with medical products, for example, and in some ways, I'm sure there's an FDA equivalent in some of those markets, right, you have to deal with. So yeah, we find that very much so, Jim, that we have to take into consideration. But frankly, marketplaces have been a great way, as you've seen, to move into these markets, right? Because the marketplace model is wonderful. It has the existing traffic. It's a closed ecosystem. Often marketplaces will have an FBA type model like Amazon does, where they ease some of that fulfillment. So yes, but absolutely, regulatory is something you have to be cognizant of in B2B categories as well.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit of what you've learned within the B2B space that may apply to some of the consumer brands and retailers here. And at the top of the list always with marketplace selling is brand control.
Right, sure.
Right, so again, how's that apply in your world, and what does that mean to these guys?
Well, actually, I'm curious in the audience, is anyone here doing B2B e-commerce? I can't really see everyone. A few of you are. And what I mean by B2B e-commerce is you're selling to other businesses through e-commerce, whether that's a marketplace or whether that's through your own e-commerce website. So brand control is absolutely critical. And what we find is that if a lot of the marketplaces, Amazon being a great example, will give you some capabilities to control it, but it's only one piece of it. And I'm talking about domestically, and then of course you've got regulatory requirements about how much control you can actually have in countries. In the EU, it's much harder to gain brand control. So for a GNC branded product, for example, there's more limitations on what you can do to govern your distribution channels, right? So if you think about, in the US, if I have a product and I have a brand in Amazon, I can register that brand. I can also have distribution agreements with my retail channels, with my distributors, with others. And you live this, right? Right, with probably some of the brands you sell. And they can actually, the brand can actually limit to some degree what a retailer or a reseller can do with that brand. In the US, some of those laws are stronger than they are globally. So it's a multi-leg stool, and we work with a lot of companies in helping the brands that have trademarks, that have something they can fall back on where they actually own the intellectual property, where they can create agreements. And in North America, you can do some of that. In other countries, it's more restricted. But Amazon, for example, won't solve the problem for you. I often come across folks saying, hey, I just registered for Amazon brand registry, and then I have some resellers here, I don't want them. Well, you can't just remove them. Amazon wants competition, right, on your brand and product, because ultimately they surface in their view the best seller and let the customer vote on that. That's what the marketplace model is at its core. But if you're a brand, you don't have to settle for lack of control on your branded product. And so there's a multi-pronged approach which involves MAP agreements, it involves distribution agreements, and involves using distribution policies. It also involves using things like warranties and guarantees on your product. So there's a whole bit of sort of legal stuff that we see a lot of. There's some tricks of the trade that companies, brands can use to kind of enforce who they want selling their products on these marketplaces, who they don't. So, and you don't have your Voorhees guy here, or gal here, but if you did, this is some of the stuff they would talk about, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. And Garrett, you kind of quickly jumped on this as the old whack-a-mole, game, and such. But I mean, you've seen a number of marketplaces. Give us a sense of like brand registry, brand center, like the protections that the marketplace operators may be providing to help a brand owner, for example.
Sure. I think that. When we spoke in one of our phone conversations, I had mentioned the challenges that we had with Mercado Libre. They have a brand protection program, but they don't have like a buy box like Amazon has. So if each seller has the same item, then it'll be two different PDPs. And so it becomes even more difficult to control other sellers, even if it's an identical product. So ultimately, we were only able to remove other sellers who had ripped images from our website. And so it was infraction of using the images in that way. Amazon, on the other hand, has been very helpful, and we've done well with restricting at least what's going on in the U.S. and some of the international markets. One point I wanted to make too is that if you're working for a brand and considering new international markets, and you get an inquiry, a wholesale inquiry for $100,000 going down to Panama, it's probably not all staying in Panama or going to the UAE. It's probably going to be going to several markets. So be careful who you select in your international partners, because once the cat gets out of the bag, that pricing gets really difficult to rein in.
We had that happen in Harbor Freight Tools, where we had orders going to Miami, Florida, and who knew? But they were bulk orders, and we were a consumer brand. But they were going to South America, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, it was, yes. So I feel your pain.
Any brand control, stories you can tell, Brian, and in terms of whether it was marketplace specific.
Well, yeah, I mean it's not uncommon, Jim, to find. We work with a lot of large, well-known, more B2B brands like Owens Corning and Zebra, and companies that make they make stuff that you probably all use in your business, right? It's not uncommon for us to find 30, 40, 50, 60 resellers as we go in and try to help these companies understand what the market looks like. And it's Amazon, it's other marketplaces as well. So, there's often and oftentimes they won't know who the companies are even that are selling their products. And what it does is, if for those of you who are in retail here, and I know there's a bunch of folks in retail as well, I mean, it causes real channel conflict for the brand, because they're going in and they're trying to sell their product into retail or into distribution, and the company goes and they look on Amazon and they say, oh my gosh, they're being sold at retail on Amazon below what the company's offering to sell it to me for as a wholesale buyer. It's a real problem. So, in those cases, and, without giving specific client examples, I could, but I just want to be careful with confidentiality. Some of these companies have had a real hard time with it. But what often they don't realize is there are paths to get there. There is some legal recourse. U.S. is a better model for that than others. But at the end of the day, the retailers, the distributors, when the brands do this, they are happier for it, because the legitimate folks are stocking the product, they're advertising the product, they're keeping it in their stores or their branches, and they're selling it on their own e-commerce sites, and the pressure eases, right? So off of the retail. So you can make margin, and you're not losing sales to opportunistic resellers. And so, yeah, many stories of that, Jim.
What are you hearing from kind of channel conflict issues within the B2B space? Again, earlier in the day, like Alex from Stance, was talking about, again, the selectively allowing certain distributor partners of theirs to, again, like have the digital rights within a region, but again, certainly not across the board, right? So again, is that something I would imagine a lot of the B2B, clients you're working with, again, they've got the history, sometimes, decades long history, right? With some distributors who may not bring much to the digital party, let's say.
Yeah, there's it's a great point. We're helping a lot of companies develop what's called Authorized for Amazon programs. And again, Amazon is where we focus, but this could be more generally speaking for internet resale. But Authorized for Amazon meaning, hey, a distributor or retailer, reseller in general, here are some criteria we're going to ask you to adhere to in order to become part of this program. And it typically is, hey, we're going to stock the product, we're going to adhere to certain brand standards, we're going to adhere to, on the B2B side, it might be installation of a product, or it might be servicing of a product, because again, a lot of folks that we work with tend to be more on the, they're doing HVAC equipment or plumbing equipment and things like that, right? So a little different than the audience here, but the same concept applies, that there's value added. The reseller is value adding to the experience. And it's not just Amazon, it's not just a marketplace, it's multiple things. And at the same time, they're also lifting up their overall, content and brand perception on the marketplace. Amazon in this country gets almost 70% of product search, right? It's not that Google is irrelevant. It's certainly relevant. Certainly, the social media is relevant for a lot of categories, et cetera. But when you think about, where there's a buying intent, that's where it is, and the conversion rate shows it on Amazon. It's ridiculous. Amazon Prime members convert at 74%. Think about that. How many of you would like to have a 74% conversion rate on your website? So anyway, point is that it's a search engine, and marketplaces in Asia as well, in these other markets are really a place where people go to search for product when there's any buying intent at all, right? So it's important for a brand to control their presence there.
Yeah. Garrett, I want to come back a little bit to the working with some of the big franchise partners. I think you said Mexico, India, and Korea are three big, strong kind of franchise partners. Early in the day, again, we heard from like Karen from Bath and Body Works, and just how again they've got this history of opening with stores and so on. So it's a very different model. But where do you, from corporate, kind of support some of these franchise partners with their digital growth strategies? Just thinking of marketing assets for example. But where's their conflict too, if you don't mind sharing any of that?
Yeah, we try to support with content mainly, but turns out there's a lot of whole legal process that we have to go through. Every individual model, for example, we have to check that contract to see if that's okay to be used in other markets, so that really dwindles the amount of content that we can actually share. But we do provide a lot of the scientific research on our ingredients and our products that they can put into different blog articles or different type of content. We have run into a funny challenge specifically on Amazon with our partner in India, because they have some SKUs specific to India and would upload to Amazon the labels of their SKU, and then they become visible to the US SKU. And so we had a meeting not too long ago. I said, okay, you need to create a new ASIN for that? And they said, well, no, because you have tens of thousands of reviews on your ASIN. You don't want to give that up. And so actually, Amazon, again, has been great. They're helping us split where those images get posted.
Interesting. Yeah, and this is a kind of a question to both of you because again, extensive Amazon experience in some different sectors. And we would hear from a number of brands in their international kind of journey using Amazon as a natural kind of entry point. Sometimes counterbalanced with plus another marketplace, plus another go-to-market, channel. I mean, is that still kind of the natural? Let's start with you. Is that, when you think of a new market, I mean, especially one where Amazon's got a big presence, is that kind of the no-brainer or no?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and I know June referenced it earlier about Rakuten being the go-to in Japan, and it really is that they hold the lion's share of e-commerce, but we launched on Amazon Japan after Rakuten, and that started taking off faster, or we're growing faster on Amazon.jp. I think part of that is related to American brand, American marketplace, but go where your buyers are, ultimately. And I'd like to also reference something that Ben mentioned about being scrappy on how you get into your international markets. How do you know where to go? Well, I found that people were selling GNC products on Rakuten. Well, maybe we should play there.
That's right. That's a fascinating point. So we get asked that question too a lot. Where should we? So we've got a U.S. Amazon presence. Maybe we're doing $3, $5, $10 million, whatever it is. We got a good presence, right? And the content. I'm talking about a client, right? Would say, where do we go next? And that would be one of the indications. Are there your products being sold in those markets? And are there you can use tools, guys, there's tools in the market. You can look and see how much volume is happening on Amazon on these markets. There's commercial software, it's not expensive, you can go get it. And there's also search. So the other thing to look for is how much search is your brand getting in that market, right? And you can look specifically using some of those tools. You can look specifically at how much Amazon search is happening on Amazon in that market. So we'll often think about those as signals for opportunity, and then of course looking if competitors are also in those markets, right, and selling on those marketplaces.
Brian, what's your take on, is it an Amazon first approach, in a lot of markets?
Well, I'm biased, Jim.
So, I want to hear it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Amazon, it depends on the market, right? So,
sure.
We focus on Amazon specifically. So I would say that, in looking at, if you look at Amazon versus, direct e-commerce, for example, there's a lot less to solve with a marketplace than there is with an e-commerce site. What I mean by that is, and if you think about, you going into those markets, a lot of the B2B companies we work with, believe this or not, this is why I like B2B, a lot of these companies, 50% of B2B manufacturers don't have e-commerce. You hear that? Isn't that crazy? Right? So the opportunity when they start with e-commerce, whether it's domestically or internationally, a marketplace is a good place to start because it builds the muscle. The traffic's already there, the infrastructure's already there. The pieces that you need to be successful and allows you to build your muscle. And I would say the same thing is true, as you move globally outside of the U.S. Now, you're a better expert than I am in terms of which marketplace makes the most sense in various markets. I can tell you, in looking at Amazon, there's certainly markets that are much larger than others, right, around the world, and some are very, very small. And we see 2%, 1% of the volume we see in the U.S. in some of these markets. We always suggest starting with the U.S. if they're not in the U.S. because that is the lion's share of the volume. It's almost 70%. So of overall Amazon retail. So it's the place to start.
Yep. Yeah. No. Again, makes sense. Let's kind of wrap up just on a little kind of forward looking. What's next at GNC for you? Again, you got a whole lot. That rest of the world is pretty vast.
Yeah, I gotta choose my priorities carefully. Hot topic: TikTok commerce. Looking primarily at domestic plays, but to operationalize an e-com platform using TikTok in Southeast Asia first.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And by the way, anybody here was doing B2B e-commerce, I saw a couple hands. I'd love to talk to you after this because I'm curious what you're doing.
So Brian, how about you? Last words. You know, again, you know, what are you watching in the B2B e-com space, and what are the implications, you know, for our consumer brands here in the room?
Oh well, I mean the consumer brands here should all be doing B2B e-commerce, and if you're not, you have an opportunity. You probably don't know it. So right. So let's talk. But I think seriously, the B2B buyer wants to buy the same way they buy in their consumer lives. Eliminate the friction. And you know, you look at marketplaces like Faire. You guys heard of Faire? Hundreds of millions in revenue going through this marketplace. This is the way that, you know, B2B buyers, and the reason they're getting all the volume is because they've eased the purchase process of the B2B buyer. The B2B buyer has the same desires as the B2C, but the suppliers are the ones not delivering the experience. So you all have opportunity. And so I think it's a huge opportunity. I'm so excited about B2B.
Excellent. Well, as we say, you know, the conversation starts on stage and continues off stage. So I encourage, you know, like others in the room here to, you know, ask these guys, you know, some questions, you know, like perhaps over the happy hour, which is coming up. But before we get there, we've got, you know, I'm going to have Kent, you know, come up, you know, with our beauty specialists, you know, and again, I want to thank these guys, you know, very much, you know, for joining me here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.